made a video last week before the FISA memo was released and ended with the discussion of the underlying issue, which isn't necessarily the revelations of the FISA memo, which is what I think we were all expecting. The real issue is whether or not Americans even care that our system has clearly been usurped by globalists. I genuinely believe that most leftists, even if they had an understanding of what has happened, simply wouldn't care because they think that the highest goal here is getting Trump out of office. They believe that that is more important than our republic, our constitution, our election process, or retaining the integrity of our most trusted institutions. I'm afraid that news overload and 2 years of political drama have desensitized the general public to alarm at legitimately distressing news, if it isn't about Trump, of course. The left has really effectively muddied the waters. Too much information is coming out every day, and even if you're a news junkie like I am, this is still a very convoluted matter. So as much as I can, I want to outline the important revelations and themes, especially from this week, to give your average person a clearer, more digestible picture of what has happened, and more importantly, to use against liberals that are acting like all of this is just no big deal. The fact that the Clinton campaign paid for the dossier is not a new claim. This was reported by the Washington Post back in late October. The reason I bring this up is that I'm still hearing from the left that claiming any link between the dossier and Clinton is a partisan talking point. It absolutely is not. There's a paper trail here, even though we're still unsure how much money went into the dossier specifically. This is from the Washington Post, and as always, my sources and the articles and videos I've mentioned are all linked below. The Clinton campaign and DNC helped fund research that resulted in a now infamous dossier containing allegations about President Trump's connection to Russia and possible coordination between his campaign and the Kremlin, people familiar with the matter said. Mark Elias, a lawyer representing the Clinton campaign and the DNC, retained Fusion GPS, a Washington firm, to conduct the research. After that, Fusion GPS hired dossier author Christopher Steele, a former British intelligence officer with ties to the FBI and the U.S. intelligence community, according to those people. Elias and his firm Perkins Coie retained the company in April 2016 on behalf of the Clinton campaign and the DNC. Before that agreement, Fusion GPS's research into Trump was funded by an unknown Republican client during the GOP primary. I think that actually turned out to be false. The Clinton campaign paid Perkins Coie $5.6 million in legal fees from June 2015 to December 2016, according to campaign finance records, and the DNC paid the firm $3.6 million in legal and compliance consulting since November 2015, though it's impossible to tell from the filings how much of that work was for other legal matters and how much of it related to Fusion GPS. At no point, the people said, did the Clinton campaign or the DNC direct Steele's activities. They described him as a Fusion GPS subcontractor. We now know that this is not true, but I'll get to this in a moment. Some of Steele's allegations began circulating in Washington in the summer of 2016 as the FBI launched its counterintelligence investigation into possible connections between Trump associates and the Kremlin. Around that time, Steele shared some of his findings with the FBI. After the election, the FBI agreed to pay Steele to continue gathering intelligence about Trump and Russia, but the Bureau pulled out of the arrangement after Steele was publicly identified in news reports. We also know that this last part is not completely true. The FBI has admitted that they fired Steele when he revealed to multiple news agencies his relationship with the FBI, which discredited him, although they still subsequently used the dossier to renew the FISA warrant. Okay, so we've known that Clinton funded this whole thing for months, but what we did not know then that we do know now is that Steele was almost certainly being fed information at the behest of Hillary Clinton. This week, Jonathan Weiner, a Washington lawyer and consultant and a former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for International Law Enforcement, penned a very revealing piece for the Washington Post called "Devin Nunes is Investigating Me. Here's the Truth." In it, he makes some really startling admissions. Here's the real story. In the 1990s, I was the senior official at the State Department responsible for combating transnational organized crime. I became deeply concerned about Russian state operatives compromising and corrupting foreign political figures and businessmen from other countries. Their modus operandi was sexual entrapment and entrapment in too-good-to-be-true business deals. After 1999, I left the State Department and developed a legal and consulting practice that often involved Russian matters. In 2009, I met and became friends with Steele after he retired from British government service focusing on Russia. Steele was providing business intelligence on the same kinds of issues I worked on at the time. In September 2016, Steele and I met in Washington and discussed the information now known as the dossier. Steele's sources suggest that the Kremlin not only had been behind the hacking of the DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaign, but also had compromised Trump and developed ties with his associates and campaign. I was allowed to review, but not to keep, a copy of these reports to enable me to alert the State Department. I prepared a 2-page summary and shared it with Nuland, who indicated that, like me, she felt that the Secretary of State needed to be made aware of this material. In late September, I spoke with an old friend, Sidney Blumenthal, whom I met 30 years ago. At the time, Russian hacking was at the front and center in the 2016 presidential campaign. The emails of Blumenthal, who had a long association with Bill and Hillary, had been hacked in 2013 through a Russian server. While talking about that hacking, Blumenthal and I discussed Steele's reports. He showed me notes gathered by a journalist I did not know, Cody Shearer, that alleged the Russians had compromising information on Trump of a sexual and financial nature. This is related to the second dossier that was in the works that people have been talking about. What struck me was how some of the material echoed Steele's but appeared to involve different sources. On my own, I shared a copy of these notes with Steele to ask his professional reaction. He told me it was potentially collateral information. I asked him what that meant. He said that it was similar but separate from the information he had gathered from his sources. I agreed to let him keep a copy of the Shearer notes. A few things about this. Sidney Blumenthal is a Clinton snake. His entire job was to defame people and destroy their reputation so irreparably that they were untouchable and completely alienated. He is so slimy, he was even hated by Obama, who he personally used his sleazy Clinton tactics on. The fact that he is involved in this gives me a real suspicion that he's the primary source of some of the dossier. Additionally, leftists are defending this article by parroting Steele's claim, which is that Cody Shearer, provided corroborating information. But really, all of this was filtered through Steele, who, I reiterate, was fired by the FBI for blabbing all over town about their top secret relationship. It doesn't matter anyway because Cody Shearer is a Clinton crony as well. You may remember him from 2015 when leaked emails showed a secret spy network through which he personally delivered intelligence to Clinton on Libya before the Benghazi attacks. He is partially responsible for that mess. This second dossier was just another way to try to validate bogus information. Steele was probably fed information by that snake, Sidney Blumenthal, under the direction of Hillary, then created the dossier. This is just information laundering. If invalid information is passed through layers of trusted officials, some with security clearances, at each point of information transfer, a layer of credibility is added and a layer of responsibility is removed from Hillary. Every person with a piece of information becomes partially responsible for it. And in the event that they're found out, she can shift some of the blame to them. We've seen her deflect this way a million times. And to add an additional layer of credibility to this, in preparation for the FISA warrant, they needed a media patsy, which they found in Michael Isikoff. Steele himself fed Isikoff the story of the dossier, which he wrote about in a piece for Yahoo News. The Yahoo News piece was then used to corroborate the dossier in the FISA application. It was just straight up circular reporting, which is information laundering just like the filtering of the Russia narrative through choice Clinton targets. The Clintons are masters of this tactic. They've created such a convoluted network of passing false information that is very difficult to trace, and it is too confusing for your average person to want to unravel it. So when her opponents do, as we're seeing now, the lazy general public just dismisses all of these efforts as partisan and invalid. It has worked for the Clintons for decades. I think that the most important revelation this week was that the dossier turned out, as expected, to be the primary source used to obtain the FISA warrant. Apparently, there were 4 pieces of evidence brought with the application, but the dossier was the most substantial. I would be very willing to bet that all 4 pieces of evidence, the supposed evidence, will get traced back to Clinton somehow. This week, the Grassley-Graham memo was released, but the media is largely ignoring it. This is from Politico. A letter from Grassley and Lindsey Graham sent to the Justice Department in January and released in declassified form this week may be more significant than the now infamous memo released by Nunes earlier this month. The Grassley letter and the Nunes memo both deal with the same thing, the FBI surveillance of former Trump advisor Carter Page under FISA and the role of the Steele dossier. The Grassley letter makes a more direct and serious case than the Nunes memo that the FISA warrant targeting Page may have been issued on insufficient grounds, while at the same time undermining key aspects of Nunes' argument. I've linked the full letter below, but I'll give you some of the highlights here. This letter states that the political origin of the dossier was revealed in the FISA application, so expect a battle on this issue. Some are saying that that is enough, others are saying that a mere vague footnote, which is what it seems to be, is not enough of a disclosure. This memo does state that although it was mentioned vaguely in a footnote that the dossier was funded by political research, it does not mention Clinton as a source, which is clearly relevant considering the timing of the surveillance and the election. If the FISA courts knew that the dossier was in fact politically motivated and likely salacious, why would they grant the warrant? That leads me to believe that there is an even larger systemic problem than had the FBI omitted this from the application entirely. Remember, and this is an argument you will hear over and over from the left, there were multiple renewals. They were renewing this without any evidence accumulating with regards to the Russia collusion, using the dossier as the primary evidence even after Steele had been terminated from the FBI. And, shockingly, one renewal happened the same month that Comey called the dossier salacious and unverified. I am less interested in whether or not Steele misled the FBI or if the FBI fully disclosed the political nature of the dossier. The FBI needed to be corroborating all of Steele's claims, irrespective of whether or not they perceived him to be a liar. And with regards to the FISA court, there needs to be some scrutiny of evidence presented before a warrant is issued, right? Another of the week's revelation that is surprising to no one is that Obama was clearly in on the surveillance of the Trump team. I bet all of my money that he was at a minimum aware of the nature of the dossier. Do you remember when Obama said this?
I do not talk to the Attorney General about pending investigations. I do not talk to FBI directors about pending investigations. We have a strict line and always have maintained it, previous presidents.
Just to button this up.
I guarantee it. I guarantee that there is no political influence in any investigation conducted by the Justice Department or the FBI, not just in this case, but in any case.
And she will be
full stop, period.
And then this week, texts between FBI lovers and top-ranking officials Peter Strzok and Lisa Page revealed this in September of 2016. Lisa Page, POTUS wants to know everything we're doing. Now, what could she possibly mean by that? He swore that he has never talked to DOJ or FBI about any ongoing investigation. And we know for a fact that some of this surveillance took place under his administration. Are we supposed to believe that they had no knowledge of any of this? I think we're going to get more information on this one shortly. One thing is for certain here. In the midst of all of this misreported and muddied information, Clinton and her cronies were absolutely jonesing for any damaging information on Trump, no matter the source. I'll lead with the funniest example. World-renowned douchebag Adam Schiff got pranked last year by some Russian radio host pretending to be a Ukrainian politician that had naked photos of Trump and other sordid information. I've linked the audio below, it's pretty funny, but it seemed fairly obvious to me that this was bogus, and he clearly thought that it was legitimate, although he's backtracked on that. He even followed up with them after. This shows me that Democrats were following every whiff of a Trump-Russia connection, no matter how ridiculous, to validate their existing conspiracy. Then yesterday, this story broke. Democratic Senator Mark Warner texted with Russian oligarch lobbyists in effort to contact dossier author Christopher Steele. Senator Mark Warner, the top Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee who has been leading a congressional investigation into President Trump's alleged ties to Russia, had extensive contact last year with a lobbyist for a Russian oligarch who was offering Warner access to former British spy and dossier author Christopher Steele, according to text messages. "We have so much to discuss, and you need to be careful, but we can help our country," Warner texted the lobbyist Adam Waldman on March 22, 2017. "I'm in," Waldman, whose firm has ties to Hillary Clinton, texted back to Warner. Throughout the text exchanges, Warner seemed particularly intent on connecting directly with Steele without anyone else in the Senate Intelligence Committee being in the loop, at least initially. In one text to the lobbyist, Warner wrote that he would rather not have a paper trail of his messages. Warner's team has verified the authenticity of these texts, which I've linked below. This is pretty damning. Why does he want to avoid a paper trail? No other members of the Senate Intelligence Committee to know that he's seeking out Steele. Why? And finally, today, this New York Times story broke. After months of secret negotiations, a shadowy Russian bilked American spies out of $100,000 last year, promising to deliver stolen National Security Agency cyber weapons in a deal that he insisted would also include compromising material on President Trump, according to American and European intelligence officials. The cash, delivered in a suitcase to a Berlin hotel room in September, was intended as the first installment of a $1 million payout, according to American officials, the Russian, and communications reviewed by the New York Times. The theft of the secret hacking tools had been devastating to the NSA, and the agency was struggling to get a full inventory of what was missing. Several American intelligence officials said they made clear that they did not want the Trump material from the Russian, who was suspected of having murky ties to Russian intelligence and to Eastern European cybercriminals. He claimed the information would link the president and his associates to Russia, but instead of providing the hacking tools, the Russian produced unverified and possibly fabricated information involving Mr. Trump and others, including bank records, emails, and purported Russian intelligence data. Good grief, what are we doing here? Delivering suitcases filled with taxpayer money to shady Russian people for illegitimate information on a democratically elected sitting president. This is insanity. How can anyone have faith in the Mueller investigation at this point? The basis of the probe is the dossier, which is verified garbage. I believe that Mueller has coordinated with Comey, and I think that we may get some additional information on this soon. I will be shocked if there are no indictments. Like I discussed in my last video, which I've linked below, bad things happen when there's an understanding that elites operate under a different set of laws than the rest of us. Let me know what you think is going to happen in the comment section. Every day we're getting these crazy new revelations. I'm scared for our country, but I also can't look away. I feel like we're so close to getting some justice, but we'll see. Thanks, folks, and I'll see you soon. Bye.